The council's meeting room was dimly lit, bathed in the cold blue glow of alien technology. Leaders from various species, once proud conquerors of countless worlds, sat in a large circular chamber, staring down at a holographic map of the galaxy. Each leader represented a different alien race: tall, muscular beings with translucent skin, short and sleek creatures with multiple limbs, and others with armored exteriors that shimmered like metal. Their coalition had been feared throughout the universe, their military might almost unparalleled. They had conquered countless planets, forcing submission through superior technology and devastating firepower. But now, one planet, Earth, had somehow eluded their grasp. "I don't understand," said Zalorian, a heavily armored warrior from the planet Zenora. His voice echoed through the chamber, tinged with frustration. "We've launched 3 separate attacks on Earth, and each time, they've either repelled us or, worse, turned our own technology against us. They should have bowed to our superiority by now." His fingers hovered over the holographic map, zooming in on Earth, a pale blue dot among the stars. The planet was insignificant by galactic standards, its population of billions mostly primitive by the alien coalition's reckoning. "We outgun them, outnumber them," Zalorian continued, his fists clenched in frustration. "Why haven't they surrendered? Why do they keep fighting?" The rest of the council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, glancing at one another. Their species were known for their advanced technology, their ruthless efficiency in warfare, but none of them had been prepared for humanity's peculiar resilience. "I've studied their culture," said Arithna, a tall, elegant being with silvery skin and a long, flowing tendril-like appendage. "They don't seem to understand the concept of surrender. They fight, but not out of necessity. It's as if they enjoy it. They don't fear us like other species do. They laugh at us." The other council members exchanged looks of disbelief. "Laugh?" Zalorian snorted. "That's ridiculous. Who in their right mind would laugh in the face of overwhelming force?" Arithna leaned forward, her tendril-like appendage shimmering as she did. "It's true. They've broadcasted their defiance across every channel. They've made mockery of our technology, hacked our systems, and their humor, it's—" Arithna paused, struggling to find the right words. "It's contagious. Their laughter spreads through their population like a virus. It's as if they draw strength from it. They mock us with their jokes, with their absurdity, and it confuses our soldiers. They don't understand it. They're immune to fear." "It's a tactic," said Bragg, a squat alien from the swamp world of Uxiel. "Laughter. We can't fight that. We can't control it." His voice quivered, revealing an uncharacteristic vulnerability. Bragg had witnessed countless battles and had been an integral part of the Coalition's most successful campaigns, but humanity's response was unlike anything he'd encountered. "We need to crush them," Zalorian insisted, his fists slamming against the table. "They don't understand the power of our forces. They won't surrender unless we show them we are serious." "If we crush them," Arithna said coolly, "we'll only make martyrs of them. They'll become symbols of rebellion, of the unbreakable human spirit. And I've seen enough of their videos to know, they'll make even our most terrifying weapons into jokes." The council room fell silent. Zalorian's face twisted into a grimace as he looked down at the map, his anger palpable. "Are we really going to let a planet of insignificant, backward creatures refuse our dominance? We've crushed entire civilizations. We've broken entire species. And now, we're afraid of a group of humans who laugh in our faces." He stood up, his form towering over the others, exuding an intimidating presence. "No. We cannot allow this to stand." The room was still, as if the weight of his words lingered in the air. "What do you suggest, then?" Arithna asked, her voice calm but piercing. Zalorian's gaze hardened. "We attack again. We use everything we've got. If they won't submit, we'll break them. And this time, we'll do it in a way they'll never recover from." The rest of the council sat in uneasy silence, contemplating his words. "You're not hearing me," Arithna said slowly. "They're not afraid of you. They're not afraid of us. We cannot use force the way we have before. These humans, they've defeated us with laughter. And the more we try to break them, the more they laugh." A deep sigh reverberated around the chamber as the alien leaders exchanged uneasy glances. Zalorian, who had been so confident just moments before, now seemed less certain, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. Then we will make them understand that we are serious. We will show them that they cannot defy the power of the galaxy's mightiest forces. Arithna met his gaze with a cold stare. You still don't get it, do you? What do you think will happen if we push them too far? They'll keep laughing. You won't break them with weapons, Zalorian. You'll make them stronger. The tension in the room was palpable, the leaders still uncertain about how to proceed. Humanity had defied everything the galaxy had ever known. They had fought not with superior technology, but with something the aliens couldn't fathom. Humor. Resilience. A relentless spirit that refused to be crushed. In that moment, the council members knew they were faced with something they could not conquer, something more powerful than their weapons or their tactics. And though none of them wanted to admit it, they all realized they were helpless in the face of something as simple as laughter. As the council meeting stretched on into the hours, no one had an answer. They knew one thing for sure: humanity was the wild card they had underestimated, and they were about to find out just how far that unpredictability would take them. The enormous alien fleet entered Earth's orbit like a storm of steel and fire, their sleek ships cutting through the stars at speeds that made the human defense systems appear laughable in comparison. The command bridge of the alien flagship was filled with a sense of utter confidence, as the high-ranking officers gathered around a large holographic display of Earth's defense systems. Commander Tsolek of the Drathan Empire, a tall and imposing figure with dark, iridescent skin, stood at the forefront, a cold smile on his face. "This will be easy," he said with certainty. "Earth's defenses are primitive, their technology outdated. We'll have their surrender within hours. Prepare for the assault." His second-in-command, a smaller alien known for his tactical brilliance, nodded but seemed slightly less sure. "Commander, their ships are not sophisticated, but they've shown an unusual ability to disrupt our communications. We've had reports of strange anomalies in our fleet systems. They may not have the weaponry we expected, but their resourcefulness has been unsettling." Tsolek waved his hand dismissively. "I've seen their primitive broadcasts. Their bravado means nothing. This isn't a war of advanced technology, it's a war of survival. And they will bow to the Drathan Empire." With a decisive motion, he gave the order, and the first wave of invasion ships launched their assault. On Earth, panic swept across major cities, but humans weren't reacting as expected. Instead of cowering in fear, they seemed strangely composed. The humans went about their business, but there was an air of defiance in their actions that the Drathan officers hadn't anticipated. Commander Tsolek's eyes narrowed as he watched the first volley of human firepower. It wasn't much, rudimentary missiles and laser systems, but it was far more coordinated than expected. Earth's military was small, unprepared for an alien invasion of this scale, and yet they fought back fiercely. The human fighters were small compared to the massive Drathan warships, but they darted around like gnats, using the stars as cover, forcing Tsolek's fleet to waste resources on ineffective shots. "What are they doing?" one of the officers on the bridge asked. "They're not retreating, they're trying to keep us busy." Tsolek gritted his teeth. "They know they're outclassed. This is nothing but a futile distraction. It won't last long." Just then, a transmission came through, a strange, almost comical message from Earth's government. Tsolek's eyes flicked toward the screen, and he listened intently. The message was a human voice, filled with a calm, almost casual tone. "Hello, Drathan invaders. It's your friendly neighborhood humans here. We've got to admit, we're pretty impressed by your fleet. It's big, it's shiny, and it definitely looks like it's here to kick our butts." There was a brief pause, and then the voice continued. "But before you do, we wanted to tell you about something called the power of memes." The alien officers on the bridge exchanged confused looks. Tsolek's expression hardened. "What is this nonsense?" he muttered under his breath, but he was curious now. The transmission continued with a montage of absurd, goofy images, Earthlings dressed as clowns, humans in ridiculous costumes, and images of cats doing random things with the title Cat Videos, the universal language. At first, the aliens assumed it was a trick, some form of cultural subversion to distract them. But as the message went on, the seemingly random images became strangely captivating. There was something about the human humor, its bizarre sense of absurdity, that had a strange psychological effect on the alien fleet. Some of the officers began to laugh, a low rumble of laughter spreading across the command bridge. It wasn't just the odd images, it was the absurdity of the situation itself. These beings had fought countless wars, crushed countless civilizations, and here they were, being mocked by a species they had considered beneath them. Solek blinked, his hand tightening around the armrest of his chair. "What is this?" he demanded. "Is this an attack?" The chief communications officer checked the transmission data and reported back. "No, Commander. It's just a broadcast. A human entertainment broadcast." Solek's fists clenched. He had expected resistance, maybe even desperation, but this was something else entirely. He was being taunted by creatures who had no concept of their own power. The absurdity of it was maddening. "Enough of this," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Initiate the planetary bombardment. Destroy their centers of command." He turned away from the screen, his eyes filled with frustration. "We'll break them the old-fashioned way." The bombardment began, large energy beams slashing across the planet's surface, striking cities and military bases. The human cities erupted in chaos as buildings crumbled and dust filled the air. Yet, amid the destruction, something incredible began to happen. Instead of surrendering, instead of running for cover, the humans did something no one could have predicted. They started to fight back with even more absurdity. Across the planet, the humans launched a wave of bizarre counterattacks. They used giant inflatable structures to block energy beams, hacked into alien communication systems, and broadcasted absurdly timed videos of dancing humans, and somehow made the Drathan ships believe their most advanced weapons had malfunctioned. And then, just when the aliens thought they'd seen it all, a fleet of human ships, small, nimble, and almost entirely unarmed, raced into the battlefield. These ships weren't built for combat. They were built for speed and maneuverability, darting through the air like flies. The Drathan fleet opened fire on them, but the human ships didn't fight back with traditional weaponry. Instead, they blasted more memes. Entire fleets of tiny ships filled the skies, projecting giant holograms of dancing humans, comical animals, and more nonsensical images at the Drathan ships. The sight of these bizarre projections began to break down the cohesion of the alien forces. Some of them were so confused they stopped firing entirely, while others just stood there, trying to process what was happening. The once imposing Drathan fleet was now entirely paralyzed, not by a single human weapon, but by the overwhelming absurdity and unpredictability of human humor. Solek stared at the chaotic battlefield unfolding on his view screen. His confidence had shattered. This isn't possible," he muttered. "They're winning." With laughter. But it was true. The humans had done the impossible. They had turned the tide of war not through superior firepower, but through their spirit, their creativity, and their relentless ability to laugh in the face of fear. And now, the aliens were the ones who didn't understand. They didn't know how to fight back against something so human. The sounds of blaster fire echoed across the streets of the city as the Drathan invaders continued their assault. Buildings burned, plumes of smoke rose into the sky, and chaos reigned below, but for the first time in the invasion, something unexpected was happening. Despite the overwhelming force of the Drathan fleet and their deadly ground troops, the human resistance wasn't simply holding its ground, they were thriving. Amidst the violence, a strange sense of unity surged through the people of Earth. Men and women from all walks of life had united in the fight against their invaders. Soldiers, scientists, athletes, and ordinary civilians all came together, not just to survive, but to stand their ground. This was no longer just a battle for Earth's survival. It had become a fight for the very soul of humanity. On the ground, a group of resistance fighters gathered in a secret command center beneath the city. The leader of this group, a former soldier named Captain Emily Harris, stood in front of a large holographic map of the city. Her dark brown hair was tied back in a messy ponytail, and her face was smeared with dirt and ash. She scanned the map, eyes sharp with determination. "All right, team," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "We know the Drathan forces are concentrated around the central district. The main objective is to disrupt their command center. We take that out, and we disrupt their entire operation." Her eyes met the eyes of her crew, a diverse mix of humans from different backgrounds. There was Lieutenant Zhang, a quick-thinking strategist, Dr. Markov, a scientist who had developed a virus capable of disabling the alien technology, and Sergeant Lopez, a battle-hardened veteran who had survived the first wave of the invasion. They all nodded in agreement. "We've got the virus ready, Captain," Dr. Markov said, glancing nervously at his equipment. "Once it's uploaded, their communications will go dark. We'll have a small window of opportunity before they can recover." "Good," Harris said. "Then let's make sure that window is big enough for us to tear them apart." The group moved swiftly, climbing through narrow tunnels and using abandoned vehicles as cover to avoid the Drathan patrols. The sounds of battle still raged overhead, but there was something new in the air. Despite the damage and the destruction, the Resistance had a strange confidence, almost like they had finally realized the invaders weren't the undefeatable force they had thought them to be. The plan was simple: infiltrate the Drathan's command center, upload the virus, and use whatever weapons they had left to create enough chaos to buy time for humanity's larger counterattack. As they reached the edge of the central district, the group came across a group of civilians who had taken shelter in an old building. They were huddled together, fear in their eyes, but when they saw Harris and her team, their expressions shifted from fear to something else. "You're not running?" one of the civilians asked. "Aren't you supposed to hide from them? The Drathan, they'll destroy everything." Harris knelt in front of the man, her face softening. "We don't hide," she said simply. "We fight. And we win." The words hung in the air for a moment, heavy with meaning. It wasn't a boast, it was a declaration. And in that moment, something shifted in the civilians' eyes. They weren't just bystanders anymore. They were part of the fight. "We'll help," the man said, determination rising in his voice. "Give us your weapons. We'll stand with you." Harris nodded, a rare smile flickering on her face. "Good. We'll need every hand we can get." They moved forward, a small but determined force, weaving through the city as the Drathan forces patrolled overhead. As they neared the command center, Harris felt the weight of the moment settling in. She had always believed humanity could fight for its survival, but now she wasn't just fighting for survival. She was fighting for the right to exist as free beings in a universe that had always seen them as inferior. The final stretch of their journey was the hardest. The city streets were now crawling with Drathan soldiers, their weapons scanning the area with deadly precision. Harris held up her hand, signaling for her team to stop. They crouched behind a broken wall, barely a few dozen yards away from the heavily fortified entrance to the Drathan command center. "This is it," she whispered, her voice steady despite the tension. "Dr. Markov, are we ready?" The scientist nodded, clutching a small device. "Ready to upload the virus. We only have one shot at this. If we miss, they'll catch on fast, and it's game over." Harris glanced around, the weight of responsibility heavy on her shoulders. She couldn't afford to fail, not for herself, not for her team, and certainly not for humanity. "Lopez, Zhang, you're with me. We breach the door, take out the guards, and hold the line. Markov, you're in charge of the virus upload. Make it fast." They nodded in unison, each of them fully aware of the stakes. The seconds dragged on as they waited for the perfect moment. Finally, as the Drathan patrols turned their backs, Harris signaled to her team. They moved swiftly, crossing the final stretch of open ground and reaching the reinforced door to the command center. It was locked, but Lopez had a way with locks. In seconds, they were inside. They hit the ground running. The guards barely had time to react before Harris and her team eliminated them with precise, practiced movements. With the entry secured, Markov rushed forward to the central terminal, his hands flying over the controls. Come on," he muttered under his breath. Meanwhile, Harris stood watch, her rifle trained on the hallway. Every nerve in her body was taut with anticipation. The door behind them opened, and the sound of boots echoed. "They're coming," Harris said, her voice low but urgent. "Hurry!" Finally, Markov hit the final key. The terminal buzzed with activity as the virus uploaded. "It's done," he said, a grin spreading across his face. "Their systems are locked down." A cheer erupted from the team, but it was short-lived. The first of the Drathan reinforcements appeared at the far end of the hallway, their weapons raised. Harris quickly readied her rifle. "Let's make sure this message gets through," she said, as they prepared for the fight of their lives. The alien forces surged forward, their heavy footsteps vibrating through the floor as they stormed down the hallway toward the human resistance. The members of Captain Harris's team braced themselves, taking up positions at the far end of the narrow corridor. Harris's heart pounded in her chest, her mind racing. They had the advantage, for now. The virus Markov had uploaded was already beginning to work, scrambling the Drathan communication systems and giving them a small window of opportunity. But the Drathan were relentless. The heavy boots of the soldiers echoed, growing louder, closer with each passing second. They had no time to lose. "Stay sharp," Harris whispered, her voice cold and steady despite the adrenaline pumping through her veins. "We don't have much time before their backup arrives. We need to hold this position long enough for Markov to finish the final sequence." Dr. Markov, hunched over the terminal, was working furiously, his hands a blur as he entered the final commands to secure the breach. His brow furrowed with concentration, but his fingers never faltered. "I'm almost there, Captain," he called out. "Just a little longer." Harris nodded, keeping her eyes trained on the hallway. She could feel the tension in the air. Every step of the enemy's march felt like it was vibrating through her bones. Lopez and Zhang had already taken up positions at the far end of the corridor, rifles in hand, ready to make their stand. Their faces were set with grim determination, each knowing that the odds were stacked against them. But they weren't backing down. They would fight. Harris exhaled slowly, adjusting her grip on her rifle. She was ready. "Get ready," she murmured, eyes flicking between her team. They nodded in unison. And then, the first of the Drathan soldiers rounded the corner. Harris's breath caught for a brief moment, and time seemed to slow. There was no turning back now. The alien soldiers were monstrous, tall, with heavily armored bodies that gleamed in the dim light of the corridor. Their faces were cold and emotionless, but their eyes burned with a malevolent intent. They had come to crush humanity under their heel, to wipe them out without a second thought. But they had underestimated humans. The first shot rang out as Lopez fired from his position, hitting one of the Drathan soldiers square in the chest. The alien staggered back, momentarily stunned, but the other soldiers didn't hesitate. They returned fire with a flurry of energy blasts that scorched the air and sent sparks flying. Harris ducked down behind a thick column of metal, narrowly avoiding a blast. She peeked around the corner, her rifle raised, and fired. The shot connected with a Drathan soldier's shoulder, knocking him back, but it wasn't enough to stop him. He raised his weapon and took aim. But before he could fire, Zhang darted out from his cover, using his agility to close the gap between them in seconds. He lunged at the soldier, knocking his rifle aside and delivering a well-placed punch to the alien's jaw. The Drathan soldier collapsed to the ground, dazed. Harris allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction, but there was no time for rest. She turned back to Markov. "How much longer?" she shouted, her voice strained with urgency. "I'm almost in," Markov responded, his voice a little shaky but filled with determination. He was sweating, his face pale, but his hands didn't stop moving. The tension in the room was suffocating as the Drathan forces advanced. The alien soldiers were relentless, and there was no telling how many more were waiting outside the command center. But Harris knew they couldn't afford to let them push forward. They had to hold their ground. She gestured to Lopez. "Cover me," she said. Without hesitation, Lopez opened fire, providing suppressing fire as Harris sprinted toward the hallway, her rifle up and ready. She shot at the advancing Drathan, hitting one in the chest, sending him crashing into the wall. The others responded, but Harris was fast, ducking and weaving to avoid their shots as she advanced. Her heart pounded in her ears as she dove behind a nearby support beam. The firefight was intense, blasts of energy and gunfire filling the air as the two sides exchanged rounds of deadly force. For every Drathan that fell, two more took their place, advancing toward the humans with terrifying speed and efficiency. Despite the overwhelming odds, Harris's resolve never wavered. She had seen humanity at its best in these moments, fighting not for victory, but for survival and, above all, for freedom. There was no going back. Behind her, Markov let out a shout of triumph. "It's done," he yelled. "I've disabled their systems. Their command structure is in chaos." Harris didn't take the time to process the news. Not yet. She knew the moment they made their move, the Drathan would retaliate with everything they had left. They had only bought themselves time, and they had to use it wisely. The sounds of the Drathan forces' shifting positions echoed through the building. Their backup would be arriving any minute now. The humans had only a small window left to escape or deal the finishing blow. Harris turned to her team. "We hold this position as long as we can," she ordered. "Then we break out and regroup at the extraction point." She motioned to Zhang and Lopez. "Get to the side entrances. If the Drathan come from the rear, we'll need to be ready." The plan was clear now. They couldn't win this fight through sheer firepower. They would have to outlast the enemy, use their knowledge of the terrain, and strike when the time was right. As the Drathan forces began to advance once more, the humans settled into their new strategy. They would hold their ground, no matter what it took. And as the first wave of reinforcements reached the corridor, they knew they had one final shot to change the course of the battle. Harris's hands tightened around her rifle, her gaze steely and unyielding. This was their moment, and they weren't going to give up without a fight. The tension in the room was palpable. The last line of defense was about to be tested. Harris glanced around the command center, her gaze meeting that of each team member. Their faces, covered in grime and sweat, were a mix of exhaustion and determination. The Drathan forces were relentless, and with each passing second, their numbers seemed to grow. The sudden realization of what they were up against, an empire that had conquered countless worlds, was sobering. But humanity wasn't going to bend, not now, not ever. "Ready your positions," Harris ordered, her voice cold and sharp. "We fight to the last." She turned to Dr. Markov, who was hunched over a computer terminal, his eyes wide with frantic energy. "How long do we have?" "Less than 5 minutes," Markov replied, his voice trembling slightly. He wiped the sweat from his forehead but didn't look up from the screen. The virus was in place, the communication network scrambled, but the Drathan were quickly finding ways to adapt. "It's not enough," Harris muttered, pacing in front of him. She looked toward the door, hearing the distant thud of alien boots echoing through the hallways. The Drathan were closing in, and they didn't have much time before reinforcements arrived. "We need more time to ensure the virus works." "We don't have that luxury, Captain," Zhang said, his voice steady as always, but the worry in his eyes was unmistakable. He was crouched behind cover, eyes scanning the hallway, rifle ready. "They're coming. We need to move now." Harris's jaw clenched. She knew Zhang was right. There was no more time to waste. "We hold the line, and we make sure this virus takes them down," she said with fierce resolve. "If it doesn't work, we don't go down without taking as many of them with us as we can." She turned to Lopez, who was standing by the secondary exit, ready to act. He was calm in the face of danger, always thinking several steps ahead. "Get to the other side," she ordered. "If they breach the perimeter, we'll need a way out." Lopez gave a short nod. "Understood." He disappeared into the shadows, his figure blending with the dark as he moved to the back exit, ready to defend it if necessary. The rest of the team took their positions, each person preparing for the oncoming storm. The tension in the air was thick enough to suffocate anyone unprepared for what was coming. The rhythmic pounding of alien boots grew louder, closer, and Harris could feel the adrenaline surging through her veins, mixing with a sense of grim acceptance. They had done everything they could, but it wasn't enough to guarantee victory. They would have to make do with what they had. "Here they come," Zhang called out, his rifle aimed at the hallway. Harris moved quickly to his side, joining him in his position as they waited for the Drathan to breach the door. Markov was still focused on the terminal, and Harris could see the sweat pooling on his forehead. He was exhausted, but there was no choice but to keep going. The Drathan were too close. "All units, brace yourselves," Harris said. Her words were drowned out by the sound of the door being blown open with a deafening crash. Drathan soldiers poured in, their armored bodies moving with an unnatural precision. Harris fired first, hitting one of the aliens square in the chest. The creature's body jerked back, but it was still standing. The rest of the team joined in, unleashing a storm of gunfire as they fought to hold the position. The Drathan soldiers retaliated quickly, returning fire with deadly precision. Energy blasts collided with the walls around them, sending sparks flying. Harris ducked behind a metal pillar, her heart pounding in her chest. She peeked out, firing again, and took down another Drathan soldier. But there were more. Always more. The hallway was quickly becoming a battleground, the air thick with smoke and the stench of burning metal. Harris heard a shout from Markov. "It's working," he yelled. "The virus is spreading. Their command systems are shutting down." Harris didn't take the time to feel relief. The Drathan were still coming, and they needed to hold their ground until the virus could do its work. "Keep firing!" she shouted, her voice hoarse. Her rifle felt heavier with every shot, but she refused to let up. They had come this far, there was no turning back now. The Drathan were starting to falter. Their ranks were thinning as the virus caused confusion in their command systems. They hesitated, their movements less coordinated as the virus took full effect. This was the opening they needed. Harris wasted no time. She turned to Zhang and Lopez. "We push forward," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Now." The team moved as one, advancing toward the Drathan soldiers. The aliens were disoriented, their weapons ineffective against the surge of humanity. For the first time, the humans were winning. Harris led the charge, her rifle raised as she blasted through another line of Drathan soldiers. Behind her, Zhang and Lopez followed, each of them cutting down the remaining enemies with cold precision. The battle was far from over, but humanity had regained its footing. As the last of the Drathan soldiers fell, Harris stood tall, her chest heaving with the exertion of the fight. She looked around at her team. They were battered, bruised, but alive. Markov let out a small, relieved laugh, wiping his brow as he looked at the chaos they had just created. "We did it," he said, though his voice was filled with disbelief. "We actually did it." Harris didn't smile. Not yet. They were far from finished, but they had won this round. The Drathan had been thrown off their course, and for the first time since the invasion began, humanity had shown the galaxy what they were truly capable of. The sound of reinforcements echoed in the distance, and Harris tightened her grip on her rifle. "It's not over yet," she said quietly. "Get ready for the next wave. We're not done until the last Drathan is off this world." They had held their ground. They had made the enemy bleed. And now they would finish this fight, not just for Earth, but for the future of humanity itself.